All right. Ladies and gentlemen, it is Monday, the 21st of October, which is the first day of early voting here in Florida. I got my ballot, and this guy we're talking to here is on it. And believe me, he has got a district the size of Massachusetts, which is the reason why we've had so much trouble trying to get him on. He's kind of busy covering that whole damn district. So let's talk about that and the other things that are important to you on the rotation. Hit the music. In my soul, you're a corner in my heart. It is so exciting to be on the first day of early voting. I mean, it's been so long in coming. Why do we have to have like a 4-year presidency and a 3.5-year campaign cycle? It just seems to be the way it is. And it gets exhausting. I mean, I am absolutely exhausted from this election cycle so far. I don't know if everybody else feels the same way or not.
I feel the same way. I'm just tired of talking to people about politics at this point. It's so illogical now. Well, it's so bad.
Here's the bottom line. Like, something that we've been talking about the last couple of days. Nobody can tell you how to vote. Not your spouse, not your crazy uncle with the red hat.
But
not anybody, and least of all us. We did, however, post a list of endorsements. Mm-hmm. This is our endorsements that we created by putting out surveys to all the candidates and looking at their voting records and trying to connect with them to see if they're the ones you should vote for. These are not mandates. These are recommendations. And as a 501c4, this is what we do. We had some people complaining there were too many Dems on our list. Well, we didn't do that by design. We didn't do that by design. This is what happened when we put the surveys out, who responded to us, and how their voting records look. And there are Republicans on there. There's a Libertarian on there. There's even a write-in candidate because we just can't see any way we could possibly endorse Kim Daniels if she keeps on telling everybody that thank God for slavery and why you talk about the Holocaust when the Jews own all the money. Just saying. It's kind of a no-brainer for us at that point in time. So we made these decisions not lightly. And one of the people that we endorse is this guy right here. So let me introduce ourselves first. My name is Gary Stein. I'm your political director here at Suncoast Normal and the master of public health. Where's the applause?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, Daryl, that looks so much better. And in the lower left-hand corner, our deputy director and our master of business administration and owner of Chillum CBD dispensary and mushroom shop in both Ybor City and St. Pete, Carlos Angel Ermida.
Wait, I want to do you again. I want to do you.
Okay. Master of public health.
They do love
in the upper left-hand corner, coming to us from above the Beltway, where he hits him below the Beltway, Christopher Cano, our executive director and master of public administration, and we three are the masters of cannabis.
Yay.
And our special guest is somebody who, if you look up Florida civil rights attorneys, he tends to be at the top of the list. Now, he worked with Ben Crump. Well, the only problem I have with Ben is that my wife's last name is Zimmerman, and she has to apologize to practically everybody because of that one particular guy in Seminole County who really did blow it for a lot of people. Oh, that's a great shot. That's a wonderful shot.
I remember being an intern in Tallahassee in 2009 and Parks and Crump. That was the premier firm when you wanted to know of who was the mover and shaker in that town. So,
thank you, very gracious.
Well, one thing that your office needs, and this is again a district the size of Massachusetts. It covers practically the entire top of the state and includes Tallahassee. Is somebody who is involved in civil rights, because that's something you don't see enough of coming out of our state capital.
That's right. Well, without question, I mean, you talk about the attack on voting rights by state government over the last few years. I mean, whether it's the voting rights, trying to decrease the opportunity for people to protest, threatening jail for them, just a real assault on individual rights. In fact, I spoke to a group yesterday about that, a group of young Democrats, about as students, having free speech and having your voices heard is everything, especially for people at that point in their lives. So obviously, that's my past, and I think that's a big part of the past of advocacy for students at both FAMU, other schools in this state, and across the country.
Oh yes, by the way, he's a rattler, so don't mess with him, okay? That's what it comes down to.
And Daryl, I know you're gonna be busy. Rattler homecomings this weekend, isn't it?
No, it's no. The bad part, homecoming wasn't bad. Well, not bad. It's good. Homecoming is actually leading into the election day. It's
okay. So it's like that's right. It's like a week-long process.
Yeah, and luckily for me, my whole family will be in town for homecoming and stand for the election. So I have to win this election because my whole family will be present.
Absolutely. And one of the few things that the Florida legislature did as far as civil rights is concerned is to set up the Mary program over at FAMU, which helps educate folks who may have been disenfranchised, et cetera, in regards to minorities as far as cannabis is concerned. And I hope that program is going strong. It has a lot of challenges, and you had some issues in regards to changing out the president and all that bit over there. So we're glad that at least they did that little tiny thing. But so much more needs to be done as far as civil rights is concerned, especially in the cannabis program. Number one, as you know, people of a minority status, there's no way they can get into the cannabis market as it currently stands. Right now, you have to have approximately $50 million to get it if you get a license. And the license they were supposed to have distributed to a member of a Black Farmers Association. Well, the guy died during the process because he was 90 years old. And they refused to let his descendants take that license. And the person they did give it to is getting ready to sell it. And so that's all in the courts right now. And with a program that's practically 7 years old right now, we still have no minority licenses. So we're grateful to somebody of your stature who understands civil rights like you do can get in there, because that is so desperately needed in Tallahassee. What made you decide to go from advocating for each individual person to going to the house and going for the big picture?
Well, without question, guys, I think overall, I'm a Floridian first and foremost, right? And so I've sat, listened, and watched what is going on in our state. And if you love this state, and if you care about people, you can't be happy about where we are and how things are being done to this state and to the people in this state. And I realized that my past and my history and my profile, I'm the type of person that could do something about getting in and having a different voice that's vocal and influential into what's going on in our state. So that's what I decided to do. And we're at a point where Ben and I just broken up our old firm. So I my business interests are kind of a little bit more diverse than they were back when I was in the firm. And I had a chance to focus on these issues. So that's what I decided to do, to change the narrative and the conversation starting in the northern part of the state where I live.
I mean, one thing the legislature does not do well is implementation. I would say, for example, the Anderson case that you were so pivotal in, about that 14-year-old who died in juvie boot camp. Was that a policy that was a bad policy, or was it bad implementation?
Probably a little bit of both. I think whoever thought it was a good idea to have sheriff's departments handling juveniles in boot camps probably didn't think that's probably not a good idea. But two, though, in terms of how you implement that policy once you have those juveniles within your custody, sensitivity to health issues, because the Marley Anderson issue was one that dealt with the health issue also. Yeah, it dealt with a situation where a person was overly exerted, but also too, you have to have a respect for the health issues that you may be dealing with. And in Marley Anderson's case, The sickle cell issue was an issue that was somewhat there, and that coupled with a bad policy gave us a bad outcome, along with some very bad behavior.
I've also noticed that among football programs across the state, high school football programs, they never demand sickle cell testing prior to people getting involved, and there has been deaths involved in regards to that as well.
Yeah, well, the other piece is this, and I don't know if you guys know it, but I chair the Sickle Cell Foundation here in Tallahassee, and I have chaired it for 25 years. So I have 25 years of experience with sickle cell. And if you saw my aunt with my daughter, I had a daughter that had the bad version of sickle cell 14 years ago. We went through a bone marrow transplant. But there's plenty of education and knowledge that can be shared both with the greater community as well as the African American community and other communities that tend to be more susceptible to sickle cell as a disease. So there's a lot of work there that needs to be done. I think that the legislature would tell you that they did some work on this past year. I think they've just started to touch the surface of the level of education that should be there. I think a person with my experience, I bring a plethora of information to the table as the legislator. As you know, often the case in the legislature, people will depend upon what some lobbyist is saying, and oftentimes that information may hit the mark, may not hit the mark, and so I think it's always great to have folks sitting in the chairs who bring probably equal, almost the same experience as those who have testified before them.
Well, I wanted to point out for our viewers, you're running against an incumbent who was personally recruited by Ron DeSantis, and when you see people who typically owe their, I would say, status or elected office to the leadership, then they tend to have a fall in line lockstep. So there's no real independent thinking. There's no real going out and limb for the people. And so I'm glad that we have you running in this seat, because it gives an opportunity to the people to have a choice to vote for someone who's not going to fall in line with Ron DeSantis's agenda. And that's an issue that we have as an organization, because Governor DeSantis consistently during this campaign cycle has harped on the dangers of marijuana, the smell of marijuana, but he's not done anything to actually improve the medical marijuana system beyond his initial executive order allowing for flower-based products. He's not done anything to address or push the legislature around worker protections. Nothing to protect medical marijuana patients from discrimination in medical treatment, like being kicked off an organ transplant list, or being kicked out of your nursing home, or being kicked off your pain management plan. He's done nothing to address the issues of not having your medical marijuana status used against you in a custody hearing, or having your kids taken away, or being investigated by CPS. Nor has he issued out the constitutionally mandated additional 20-some licenses to create a diverse medical marijuana market. So it really, we have a lot of gripes on the governor and the fact that his lockstep cronies have not done anything to address this. And so I just wanted to throw it in your court, Daryl, as to, some of these things I just mentioned. How do you see yourself being able to, implement that or impact public policy when it comes to, the shortcomings of our medical marijuana system?
Well, I guess you guys may not know. Let me go ahead and divulge something. So one of a person I know in my community here in Tallahassee, when the first medical licenses were granted by the state, I was actually on an advisory committee for that license. So I've been deep in this issue, aware of the issue from the beginning. And so I think that given just the information that I've learned through that process, and obviously knowing people who are deeply involved with it, I come to it with something that is squarely on my radar screen, and a whole bunch of perspective that I can add to the conversation.
Now, we want to know what your opinion is on the current Amendment 3. You've had a chance to read it.
4.
Yeah, 3 and 4. Yeah. Definitely, we're in favor of 4. I got 3 daughters. I definitely believe in 4. But as far as 3 is concerned, which is having to do with adult use cannabis use in the state of Florida, we want to know where you stand on this. We as a group stand on it because of it. We want to reduce the amount of arrests for possession that happen day in and day out. And yet, I don't see anything on that amendment that will reduce the amount of people who might get arrested for use, not just possession, on any of these pretextual traffic stops, which are still prevalent across the state.
Well, let me say my support is on a macro level, right? I think generally speaking, it needs to pass. I've not looked in detail at the things within it in terms of the execution. So that's something we'll take a look at. But I will say this, as I said the other day in the debate. Generally speaking, I want to protect whatever the voters supported. I think the legislature has to be a little careful before we act to do anything that the voters didn't intend. So if there's some ambiguity that has to be addressed legislatively, okay, we can address that. But generally speaking, I want to honor what the voters believe they voted for versus us second guessing or doing the we know best thing that we commonly see in Tallahassee.
Now, we generally voted for the felons regaining their voting rights a couple of years ago,
Right.
and that wasn't implemented as well as we'd expected it to.
Not at all. Well, one, because politically, I think there's a group of folks down in Tallahassee who decided that it wasn't in their best interest to have a whole bunch of fellows really get their right backs. So it was clear in that situation they were second guessing the voters and continue to second guess the voters on that issue.
Well, we saw the same thing with Amendment 2 with medical marijuana. You know, Joe Redner actually sued, won in the lower courts, lost in the higher courts. But, you know, the idea that you should have whole access to the plant and the right to grow it at home. And that's not what we got with the implementation of Amendment 2. And, you know, that's been a criticism of Amendment 3. But, you know, to the viewers and listeners out there, we understand that every other adult use amendment has been shot down by this conservatively stacked Supreme Court that Ron DeSantis appointed. Amendment 3 was written specifically to be able to pass the litmus test of this court, one of the most conservatively stacked courts in the country. And it did. But it had to be so narrow and single issue in mind that it strictly just allows for adults 21 and up to essentially get over-the-counter access without a doctor's recommendation from the existing licensed entities. And you know, it does have a caveat in there that the legislature could license other entities. And that's something that, again, we're going to need the right folks in office who have their head in the game. And Daryl, you've been on it from the get-go, like you said, from that original licensing committee. So, you know, we're definitely going to want to see some type of way where other businesses can get into this. The vertical integration in Florida seemed to be a safeguard measure. But in actuality, what we've seen is it almost has created an oligopoly in a lot of ways, where there's only a handful of businesses running things. And it just, you know, small business owners like Carlos will never really get the opportunity to get into the industry unless we do break up vertical integration.
I can see that.
Yeah, I just want to point out a few things on what you said, Cano. Basically about this whole we shouldn't vote for Amendment 3 because there's no home grow. First off, regulate Florida.
That won't stop them, though. Hey,
sorry, guys. I just want to rant about this. But no, regulate Florida was up for review by the Supreme Court of Florida. They had a petition that it did two things. It aimed to legalize marijuana and it aimed to legalize home grow, right? Denied. Single subject rule. You can't have home grow in there if you want to legalize marijuana. So we've seen this before by the Supreme Court. And second, there was an organization called WISE that sprouted out at the same time Smart and Safe Florida came out. And this organization was dedicated to producing an amendment with a single subject rule of growing cannabis, being able to grow cannabis at home. And nobody seemed to give a shit then. Yeah. So, I mean, this is what we got right now. We shouldn't avoid from taking a step forward because we can't have everything that we want. We should still move forward, guys. I'm tired of being stagnant.
One thing I found out going through the court system, and I helped with Joe Redner with some of his bills and helped write the Flora Grown bill, which was magnum opus. And but the situation is that a single word can kill a bill based on how the Supreme Court or the Court of Appeals wants to change it. And in fact, the home grow bill that Joe Redner had was knocked down because of the word use. Just one word, use.
Yeah.
As to what use meant. Did it mean you could grow? Did it mean you could possess? Did it mean you could actually use it in public? And that's what my concern is right now. Yes, Amendment 3 does allow for possession and sales, and it says that specifically. But it doesn't say anything about public use. And yet I saw a TV ad the other day. I had sent this to Carlos to take a look at, where this woman claimed that it definitely says that they can create a situation that would prevent public use, and she wants to be able to smoke anywhere she wants. Well, right now, public use is already illegal. It was made illegal when we went through medical cannabis.
And Gary, fun fact, public use is illegal in Colorado. If you ever go to a 420 festival out there, you'll get $1,000 ticket for smoking a joint at a Bob Marley and the Wailers concert. I've seen it happen to people. But for some reason, people think that, just because a state legalizes adult use, that all of a sudden it becomes this mecca of being able to, treat it like it's the 1969 again. And this, that's just not the case. And so, Amendment 3 is, like Carlos said, it's a first step. It's not the last step. It's not a giant leap. Daryl, you know this better than most. When it came to civil rights, the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65, there wasn't everything in one get-go. It took steps of legislation that had to be rolled out for folks to be able to get to where they want to get to. And on this topic that you touched on, Gary, when it comes to searches, there is still a disproportionate amount of Black and Latinos in America stopped, even in legal states, on the highway. Still get their cars searched, still get their cars tossed. What some of that could cut down on of those searches is, like they've done in Maryland, like they've done in Virginia, is that if we toss the smell of cannabis out as probable cause, and they've had to do that via legislation. Other states like Tennessee have upheld the smell of cannabis because folks were arguing that, it's hemp products. And so, there is that issue of whether or not we should continue to have a drug dog be able to come by your car and get your car tossed for the smell of marijuana. So, Daryl, that's something that the legislature, may also have on their hands. And we like to highlight to all of our candidates the different issues that folks have talked to us and the different issues that other states have seen, moving forward. So, your freshman class will definitely have a lot on its plate going in after this election.
So true. I'm sure that there are folks out there, especially the folks who are on both sides of this, have a ton of issues that they probably plan to bring forth after this thing passes the general election.
Now, I'm not trying to get too political as far as the other party is concerned, but they seem to be in an awful lot of denial. And
I would say cognitive dissonance, but it will go with denial.
I would go with cognitive dissonance and denial. How about that?
All right.
But the fact is, we do know that a disproportionate number of people with color will be pulled aside for pretextual stops, which eventually end up in arrests. Has that gotten any better in the last couple of years or gotten worse in Florida?
Well, I think it's always bad. The unfortunate part in our state is, in some situations, we create a situation where officers are encouraged to stop people for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. You see it as you drive down the street, on the highways especially, the level of targeting folks and who they decide to stop for whatever reason. So unfortunately, that's built into what happens on the highway. And there's very little out there to resist it. And you see it throughout the country too now. It's not just Florida. You see it in other states too, where a certain group is far more targeted on the highways. Otherwise, you would think that the only speeders happen to be mostly people of color. Only a certain group of folks get stopped. So when we know speeders come in all shapes and sizes.
Yeah, there was one speeder I remember they pulled over a couple of years ago who happened to be a state representative who happened to be in charge of a lot of big committees. This guy used to be ER physician, and he had a half-finished bottle of wine in his seat. He was whipping back and forth, but for some odd reason, he didn't go to jail.
You figure, you know why? And once the cops figured it out, they probably took a different avenue.
Well, we have discretion on the part of policemen all the time. I mean, Kano and Chris and I, and Carlos and I worked on getting civil citations here in Hillsborough County. And even with that discretion involved, there's still a lot of people who were not given civil citations, but were actually getting arrested. And a lot of it had to do with, I guess, the mindset of the policemen involved. I'm not going to say racist per se, but is that possible?
Well, I think when you start talking discretion on the side of the road, discretion is discretion. And we give it to who we want to give it to.
I guess my concern is that with adult use, we've been pushing for reciprocity for years, so that tourists who come down here, whose grandmother is using it for her cancer or Parkinson's and things of that sort, could get arrested when they come down here, or when they try to sneak it through TSA. And we're thinking, well, hopefully this will make things better because they can actually buy it here. But I see our tourists being pulled over and arrested for use in their cars, just because there might be a scent of cannabis in the car, like what Chris was saying. Because right now, the scent of cannabis is still due cause.
Wow. Well, we do all want to say to all the viewers, we don't support getting behind the wheel intoxicated in any way, shape, or form. But we also understand that, it can still be on your clothes. If you happen to smoke in your car, those are all different things. So protect yourselves. Be an intelligent consumer. NORML supports the freedom and civil rights of all responsible cannabis users. Responsible is a key word in that. And be smart. Know your surroundings. Know where you are. Know what you're doing. But we're going to continue to do everything we can to make sure folks are safe. Now, again, the federal illegal status of cannabis as a Schedule I drug, and even if the December 2nd hearings by the DEA decide to change that to Schedule III, there still is this issue of crossing across state lines with it. So you're going to have Georgia troopers waiting for you coming into Florida. You're going to have troopers waiting for you when you cross that border coming out of Florida. These are things to think about. Interstate 95 is the drug highway of America. They come in through the port in Miami, and it goes all the way up. The traffickers drive illegal drugs, illicit drugs, all the way up to Maine. So there's this issue. But what we do have with Amendment 3 in other states as well, 25 states to date, essentially half the country, is that domestic cannabis markets have severely impacted those illicit markets from other countries, from whether it's Mexican cartels or Colombian cartels. We can produce homegrown cannabis here in America at much higher quality and much better prices than any of the illicit cartels can do. And that's the issue that we want to caution our government on, is that they see tax revenues on this. But if you overtax it, like we've seen in certain states like California, you're going to drive people back into the illicit market. So, Daryl, one of the things that, you all are going to probably address is, what's the tax rate going to be? And that's a major concern folks have, because one, the medical system, you don't pay taxes on medicine in Florida, but an adult use system, it's no longer medicine. So there's going to be a tax on it. It could be local taxes, state taxes, county taxes, but the tax rates are going to drive people back into the illicit market and away from safe and unregulated products. And that's going to be a concern that definitely we're going to share, is we want safe, regulated products. People want that peace of mind. I mean, there's also been criticism in the Wall Street Journal recently of the current medical marijuana players in Florida, and how 80% of their tested samples fail for safety when it comes to mold, pesticides, heavy metals, all those other things.
Wow. Without question, that's a treasure trove of issues that we're going to have to deal with. I'll say this here. If you guys probably know, one thing I didn't say earlier is on the educational side. I'm closely associated with FAMU, so the educational part of this at FAMU, the Mary program, I know a lot of people personally with this Dr. Green Powell. I think they have a consulting firm here in Tallahassee working with them. I think I saw a young lady at large. She's with Salters Mitchell. I saw her the other day. And we're talking about just some of their efforts in getting the proper messaging out on this. So it's close to where I live. I live right by FAMU. And so a lot of the people who are playing a very personal role in day-to-day of folks that I know and see. So as a person coming into the legislature after I win this election, I'm going to build on those relationships. One, to come up to speed on where things are. Two, find ways that I can be helpful in that regard. So I'll use the cool thing about being in Tallahassee. Most of the government is here. Most folks come here to deal with government. And whereas I often see folks from other parts of the state have to come here to try and get closer to the action, I live where the action is. So I can get in my little truck and be downtown in about 8 minutes.
Yeah, I dread the drive to Tallahassee, and I don't know. Yeah, you can stay up there. I'll stick to Tampa.
Well, I'll say this here: Tallahassee's been spared all the hurricanes, so.
Yeah, that's true. We are kind of screwed up down here in Tampa right now.
Yeah, I looked at the climate change maps. Other than Mount Dora, Tallahassee is the only other spot that doesn't get sucked up under the ocean in the next 100 years.
Well, they're kind of high on the hill up there, you know. That does make a big difference. Daryl, I got a couple of people posting on my Facebook the other day saying, "Can you tell me why we should vote for Kamala Harris without mentioning Trump?" And I said, no, you can't do that because it's a choice between two people, not a choice just of one. Anybody who has a vote between at least two parties. That's how we got set things up. So you have an opponent. I call him the Herschel Walker of the Tallahassee Senate. But I mean, we had an issue with him in the last election where he mentioned the fact that he was having an anxiety attack. He got himself a D8 gummy from somewhere, maybe a gas station or something. And he said he had an anxiety attack and he had to rush himself to the hospital to get his stomach pumped. Of course, by the time that he got to the hospital, most likely the stuff was in his bloodstream anyway, if he was feeling anything from it. But obviously he was not educated enough to utilize the medicine. And yet he was speaking out against it. And that's my concern. We'd like to make certain we have our legislators educated. What do you see as a difference between you and your opponent?
On which issue? I mean, in general?
pick your favorite.
Well, a couple of things, man. You know, we probably the only we have the similar in common is we black, okay, and big guys. It stops there. My life has been spent really working for Floridians and getting involved in situations and cases in people's lives where they were in big fights against big institutions, knowing with their life on the line. And so we built a firm that got very deep into cases, whether it's, you know, we did things like voting rights stuff, pro bono for Madison 9, got involved in recounts in Gadsden County when Morris Young was under threat for sheriff in the recount, to getting out here and representing these cases against whether it's, you know, police department, sheriff's department, Department of Corrections, major hospitals when they did people wrong. When you live a life of dealing with life and death stuff, you tend to see things as life and death is very serious. And normally those situations involve somebody who's up against an institution. And institutions have unlimited money. And normally the last fight you ever want to be in is a fight against an institution because they have enough money to fight you forever. And you are just a person. So all you have is your humanity. All you have is the one life you have, and you got to deal with things. So my life has been spent working on those life and death things. And I often think about the cases where people lost their lives that I was involved with, and I may have had to do an autopsy. And I'm looking at the person laying on the table who's dead. And I'm trying to figure out what happened to them so I can properly tell their story. And so when you live that life, and you see that person's body laying there, and you're trying to figure out what happened to them, and was it wrong, and does our society and our laws offer an answer for that? And that's serious shit, y'all. Okay, that ain't a day at the park. Okay, that ain't a day at the park. That's some serious stuff that's happened. So Normally, you've had some alleged police investigation, you've had an autopsy, you've had a family or person that had no answers, and that came and talked to someone like Ben and I. And we decided that we thought it was important that we would invest our time and energy. And let me say, there ain't a bunch of money in that kind of work, y'all. That's the biggest lie told out there, right? You don't hear about it. For as many deaths you hear that go on involving institutions and law enforcement organizations, there's no truckloads of money being given to those families. So don't believe that lie, okay? But what you do have is a bunch of people losing their lives in many situations. And unfortunately, the calling card has been from one side of our community that you're just supposed to support the law enforcement no matter what. And I support law enforcement, but I also better put, I support equal justice on the law. Equal justice on the law. And that's the hallmark of the system. It ain't whatever this guy says is true and whatever the other guy says is not true. No, we have a system that requires justice be equally given and administered. And so we take that for granted because we get scared into, you got to support this guy if he's he's a function in the process, one function. There are multiple people who play a role in that process. I was honored in my life to be able to be a person or a citizen that could not do stuff for money, right? Because as a lawyer, you can do a lot of stuff to make a lot more money than I made. But when you take on a situation where a person has lost their life or been severely hampered because of someone else, you are taking a different approach. And so I come to the table with a resume of doing serious stuff, laying my career on the line, and fighting for the lives of people. Most of the time it's not popular to do, because the easy thing to do is to say, I back the blue. Whatever they do is fine. Well, that's not proper law, and just take the blue out of it. We all ought to be for proper implementation of our laws, period, whatever that looks like. Now, proper implementation of our laws.
One thing I found out is our Sheriff's Association may be a group, but there's a lot of diversity within that group. The Sheriff of Gadsden County actually came out in favor of Amendment 3. Grady Judd over by our side of town, not so much. I mean, Chris has personally debated Grady on a number of occasions, and he came up with the idea that he had done a research of all the people who were in jail for cannabis possession and saw that the majority of them were violent felons. And so therefore he came to the conclusion that cannabis actually makes you into a violent felon.
Well, Gary, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's a kind of a good segue into one of the issues that Daryl touched on, in that institutions have unlimited dollars. And one of the institutions right now that's been running ads against Amendment 3, essentially, or rather about the harms of cannabis, is Ron DeSantis' Department of Transportation. And he got Grady Judd to get on there. And Grady, quote, said, "When we make home visits for domestic violence calls, they're often associated with marijuana use." And that's just like, Sheriff Judd, I've always found him to be a man of integrity, but I just can't square that away in that statement. And then you got Duval County Sheriff T.K. Waters saying that there are too many kids going to the ER because of weed gummies and joints laced with fentanyl. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the news in a 10-year study showing that that there's hardly any fentanyl in the cannabis in the grand scheme of things. It's one of those reefer madness talking points. And then you got the Brevard Sheriff Wayne Ivey saying that they see more traffic collisions and fatalities because of people driving high. And we've been on this show reporting plenty of times that in legal states we've seen the opposite, that the studies are showing that these things go down. But what this really ties into, and we're going to have a guest coming on in the coming weeks, who's a state senator that's suing the state over this, is that they're unconstitutionally using our tax dollars for political purposes to essentially scare folks off of Amendment 3 in a roundabout way on this. And so that's definitely concerns that we have. And Daryl, you touched on a great point about it's not easy to take on established institutions. It's not easy to call things out, but we've seen it time and time again. Body cameras have really changed the game in policing in a lot of ways, and we've seen uncouth things happen when folks didn't know that the cameras have an early record function and such. I've seen it from cops in Baltimore planning drugs and didn't know their cameras were on, to sheriffs in Florida in Jackson County planning drugs on people who didn't have anything to do with it. So it's just sad to see that our institutions have grown so strong that to take them on and say we should have equal justice on the law makes people think like you're not patriotic, that you have to back the blue no matter what. And that's just, where are we in this society where, it's like everything is just an extreme. There's no middle ground anymore on things. There's no question that, it used to be, you used to question government and authorities. And now we have essentially folks on the right that have a cult leader running their party. You can tell the difference of them by their red hats. So Daryl, you've been on this earth longer than I have, and Carlos, what is your thoughts on it? Especially, you bring a unique perspective as a black man to the situation, and one that's been in the fight for civil rights.
Well, you watch the Republicans, and first they say they back the blue, and then as soon as something happens, the whole Secret Service ain't shit. So I mean, it's
or the
crazy,
FBI's
right?
corrupt, right?
Yeah, the FBI is corrupt. So, and luckily, you at least seeing some diversity in those levels of law enforcement. But I'll say this too: in my race, where, for example, most of the elected sheriffs have come out in favor of Corey Simon, I get a whole bunch of folks that work in the sheriff's department who approach me in public situations, say, "Hey, we all don't do what the sheriff does in politics. We with you." Because most of them know that I don't hate the police, right? I'm very supportive of law enforcement, and I'm for proper enforcement of the law. Mm-hmm. And I was talking with one sheriff the other day in one of the Panhandle counties. He never met me, right? But he endorsed my opponent. And after I talked with him for about 7-8 minutes, I think he realized I have far more in common with him than Corey Simon does. Mm-hmm. And so, unfortunately, the politics run so deep with some of those people. They're not open-minded people. They're politicians. They're not even really good law enforcement people. They're politicians. And so keeping, in that position, I would hope that their goal is to keep everybody safe, and they want everybody to have confidence in that department. Because when people start, not having confidence in law enforcement officers, it leads to a lot of other things. And so making sure once elected, you gotta, be there for everyone. And it's important. Y'all asked me earlier about the difference between the current senator and I. Another really big point is I probably care far more about other things in this area than he does, whether it's business development, public education. He talked about school choice, says nothing about the hit that public schools have taken as a result of some of his other policies, the lack of money that's coming to the public schools. Says nothing about it. I care. We mentioned that I do some work in sickle cell, but primary care is like a major issue that I care about deeply. You hear him talk about hospitals, but as you guys know, since y'all getting a little older now, when a person gets to the hospital, they're pretty sick. And so the key in life is to deal with whatever conditions that you happen to be dealing with before you get to the hospital, so that you manage those conditions. So those are the issues I care deeply about. I live that life, and that I'm really, really into.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's one thing that has bothered me is that I've got a great historical perspective in regards to how medicine has approached cannabis over the last century. And one of the things I actually found out in the 1800s was that cannabis was actually a good method to reduce what they call opioid poisoning, or reduce opioid withdrawal, to allow people to get off of opioid, morphine, whatever it was at the time. And yet we have a legislature that just made it so that if you are in a rehab facility, you can't use cannabis. So if you are trying to get off of opioids, they have taken a major possible solution away from you. And we're trying to find a way to get that back in because we still have an opioid epidemic in our state.
Yeah.
And it affects everybody of all races, economic status, things of that sort. And yet to have a solution that is being taken away just because of the fact that they don't like it is not following the science.
Indeed. And
how
Daryl,
can we go against that?
Well, Gary, we're gonna have to get folks like Daryl elected, and they're gonna have to pass a law to overturn it. But then, even then, we're gonna have to make sure that either DeSantis ain't in office when it happens, or have enough votes to override a veto. So the process is what it is.
Like Daryl, I spent a lot of time going back and forth between. That's the reason why I hate going up there. It's because I've spent a lot of time going back and forth between Tallahassee and Tampa the past 2 years, particularly because of these hemp bills. And two things that I noticed. One, I want to talk about your opponent in just a minute, but first, right? You really do like. It really seems to me if people who vote Republican just look at how liberals and Republicans are using their vote, like legislators are using their vote, it really seems like Democrats have become almost the embodiment of what like old school Republican values are: small business, free market. These are things that Democrats really have been fighting in Tallahassee to protect against these conservatives up there that are just kind of like your opponent, just kind of placed in there. They do what they're told, right? The guy in charge has an agenda, right? And I'll tell you what I mean. All these times that I went up to Tallahassee, right? I sat at these committee hearings, and Corey Simon was in these committee hearings, and he was quiet as fuck. He did not. He sat there and he listened, But at the end, he voted no. He got out, right? But there was one particular meeting this year. It was the first time it was heard in front of a Senate committee, right? And they were armed. You know what I mean? Like, they saw that we were fighting this hemp bill last year. They saw that we were even successful in getting it changed before anything was voted in or anything like that, right? And they were armed. They were ready. They knew our arguments. They had talking points. There was several senators all across this committee. Osgood was up there saying that you're going to get addicted to crack if you smoke hemp, and a number of different people were up there with their opinions, right? But this particular one was the one that Corey spoke, and he had this whole speech prepared about how he ate a gummy and how the person at the store didn't tell him, right? And yeah, he said start slow and build your way up, but he didn't really know what that meant, so he just ate a whole gummy. And then, oh my God, I'm freaking out. I gotta go to the hospital. Oh my God. And then they pump my stomach. They pump my stomach in the hospital. And this is the reason why. I mean, this guy's a fucking football player.
No, you can't tell me a Florida State football player from the 90s didn't try a weed brownie in college. Come on, I'm calling bullshit.
You can't tell me a guy that's been hit in the head that much eats 10 milligrams, and then all of a sudden, I don't know where I am. Oh my God. Granted, right? Granted, people consume edibles, they need to be educated, right? If you're eating 100 milligrams and you're a lightweight, you're not going to have a very good time. But I mean, come on, dude. Like, this guy is up there lying out of his ass, right? Just doing what he's supposed to do, what he's told to do. And, this is the reason why we need to get people like you up there, people who are educated, people who know the law, people that know what people need.
And people who can handle their edibles.
Yeah.
But on that note, Daryl, why don't you go ahead and close us out? I know you're a busy, man. You got a huge district to campaign on. Why don't you tell the voters at home why they should support you and how they can support you, where to go to?
So, supporters, you guys, if you want to support my campaign, it's a great campaign. We're going to flip the seat from Republican to Democrat. And things are going really well. Go to darylforflorida.com, darylforflorida.com. If you want to help my campaign, I represent far better North Florida values than my opponent. And I'll be a great senator. I'll be a friend to folks. I won't say which family member, but I have family members who have been enjoying good cannabis all my life. So I'm used to the smell. And so, they haven't.
Have you ever partaked, by the way?
It has not had a negative effect on their life. I'll leave it at that. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you so
much.
We
appreciate you, Daryl. And with that, team, I think it's time to go to our news segment.
Absolutely. Thanks, Daryl.
Bye-bye.
All right, so jumping in here at the top of the news, as I touched on earlier, Ron DeSantis, according to Marijuana Moment, is stirring the pot again with more anti-marijuana ads, but these are being funded by the taxpayers through the Department of Transportation, and Senator Jason Pizzo actually has filed a lawsuit against that. We're actually going to have Senator Pizzo come on the rotation here the weekend before the election on November 3rd, so pretty excited for that. But in the Marijuana Moment article, we actually saw that there are two key polls that folks should be aware of. Number one is the James Madison Institute showing 64% of likely voters in Florida are in favor of Amendment 3. But the recent poll put out by the Florida Chamber of Commerce, which again is against Amendment 3, found that 59% of likely voters in the state back Amendment 3. So you have the folks against it, or even their own polling shows it, right at the threshold. It needs to have 60% to pass. So if you're someone who's sitting at home and you're thinking, I'm a pot smoker, I don't really get politically active, it'll pass, I'll be fine. No, that's not what's going to happen. If you support ending people getting arrested for cannabis and you want to vote for Amendment 3, get off the couch and go do that. Early voting has already started in Florida. You can go to the Florida Division of Elections, go to your local county supervisor of elections website, find out the early voting sites, and take a picture ID with a signature and go ahead and cast your ballot. If you want to vote by mail, you have until 5 o'clock on Thursday to request your vote by mail ballot. So get out there, go ahead, sign up, and get up and vote. This election is going to make all the difference, and sitting at home is not going to make any change. So moving on, Marijuana Moment has a lot of great things, and usually I read the normal news, but one key headline that really touched me that I saw was maternal marijuana use is not tied to child autism or developmental delays. And this is coming from a federally funded study published by the American Medical Association. So understanding that there are two federally funded reports published in the Journal of the American Medical Association that may help at least, allay some of the concerns that people have around prenatal exposure. For years, people would cite the study that was done in Jamaica, a 30-year study of that. But now we actually have data showing, that pregnancies from 2011 to 2019 that were exposed, in utero to cannabis didn't show any increases associations with autism spectrum disorder, and that, folks can be concerned about language disorders or motor delays and that sort of thing. And these were funded by the National Institute of Drug Abuse. Often it's ironic, but this is the same thing we've seen time and time again. The federal government will fund studies hoping it returns a negative result on marijuana use, and the studies, oftentimes science comes back the other way and shows that it does not. So that's definitely something to think about, because when it comes to government, as our guest touched on, there oftentimes seems to be large and almost unlimited budgets to try and shoot things down that they don't want. And you actually have several states this election going to the ballot, like Florida. Arkansas has a medical marijuana measure on the ballot. And a conservative group in Arkansas is saying that, essentially it's going to make Arkansas a drug use destination state, according to the Family Council Action Committee. And, they're essentially also trying to make folks extremely wary about the influx of illegal immigrants bringing drugs into the state, and that there's going to be a permanent monopoly of folks, essentially running the medical marijuana in that state, and that children are going to be harmed, from advertising weed to them. There's so many things that's just wrong with where we're at right now with the reefer madness, repeating things that have been debunked time and time again in every single state. And this is definitely something that is going to continue. We just have to continue to do our best as voters to be educated on it. But, all hope is not lost. Most recently, Puerto Rico's governor has come out and said he broadly supports decriminalization. Governor Pedro Pierluisi of the New Progressive Party on this past Thursday said while he's committed to addressing the fentanyl issues that the island has, he wants to continue to prosecute those involved in the legal distribution of drugs. He doesn't agree that people who use them should be incarcerated. And so this whole over incarcerating target cannabis users is something that the governor of Puerto Rico is finally coming around and seeing that decriminalization can be done to a certain extent with care and controls, to not encourage drug use, but if anything, to discourage it, but not continue to waste tax dollars to lock people up for it. Now, on the other hand, you have the U.S. Army coming out with an updated drug policy explicitly banning Delta-8 THC hemp products and even warning soldiers against consuming poppy seed bagels, which can create false positives when testing for opioids. And so the Army's substance misuse guidance took effect October 4th. And with respect to Delta-8 components, it represents one of the latest examples of how government and private institutions are attempting to navigate this legal gray area that was created by the 2018 Farm Bill that Trump signed into law. Now, understanding that the use of products derived from hemp may be federally legal for civilians, but is still prohibited for soldiers, and that Delta-8 products can cause you to test hot. And then the Army also has been looking at non-intoxicating CBD, and those CBD products, whether injected, inhaled, or otherwise introduced to the human body, food products, transdermal patches, etc. Of course, they're addressing with the punitive measures of that. But again, if you're a soldier, cannabis has no place, according to the Army, for you in your body, even with the current legal status that we have. So,
but I mean, that's always been the case, though. I mean,
yeah.
The issue is not necessarily that they're banning Delta-8. It's the issue is that the drug tests can't tell the difference.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so the operational readiness of our armed forces always remains a major concern for folks. One of the things that I like to see happen with the Doobie Act being passed, and I've brought this up to senators and such, they want to make sure that people can still serve and get security clearance to the federal government with past marijuana use. I'm interested to see what happens to those soldiers, airmen, and such who had dishonorable discharges because of it, and whether or not there'll be anything retroactive. So should legislation pass that changes the status of things. And so there's a lot to be said about our veterans, armed forces. We talk about our vets so much when it comes to cannabis use, but the paperwork and how folks' discharges are affected by cannabis use while they were in uniform is definitely something to be addressed. Now, I do want to go back to a recent report and analysis that was published in the Lancet Regional Health America's Journal that showed a 10-year analysis that fentanyl seldom is identified in illicit cannabis samples. Now, this is coming out of Harvard Medical School. Researchers reviewed drug chemistry results from nearly 12 million samples of illicit substances seized by law enforcement between 2013 and 2023, and they identified fentanyl in fewer than 2% of the samples tested. Fentanyl co-occurrence was most prevalent in heroin, but was low among non-opioid substances. Fewer than 3% of cocaine seizures tested positive for fentanyl. Only 1% of methamphetamine samples tested positive for it. Cannabis samples were least likely to test positive for fentanyl. Now, I know you're going to see a lot of ads pro Amendment 3, anti Amendment 3, and they're going to talk about fentanyl being in the weed. Even Trump's VP pick, J.D. Vance, has come out and tried to scare people about fentanyl being in the marijuana. Look, the results are clear. There's no evidence of widespread fentanyl co-occurrence in cannabis. Plain and simple, that's Harvard Medical School. That's not normal.
Never
That's
made
not
sense.
anyone else, you know?
It just never made sense. So
Yeah.
I mean, I understand the concept that Gary's brought up in the past, that some could like waft in the air and land on your cannabis or something like that.
But that's all unregulated packaging institutions. You know, the guys sitting in their underwear.
Yeah, but
cutting it and putting it in little balloons.
As far as cross contamination goes, that's the least of their worries. Like literally, like maybe putting it in the same bag is probably the biggest issue. Where people that have pill presses that they press aftermarket drugs, and they press some fentanyl into something, and they don't fucking clean the machine.
Well, you know, Normal's opinion is clear from national all the way to our chapter. The best way to address any concerns you have about clean and safe cannabis is to take it off the street corners and put it behind the counter of a licensed business where they're lab tested and labeled accordingly. And I think that is definitely something that folks should consider in the grand scheme of things, you know, when it comes to whether or not they want to see Amendment 3 pass. It's like, do you want to deal with this or not? You know, there's a lot to be said around, you know, safe access to cannabis. Now, there is something that I read recently in the Journal of Social Psychiatry and Psychiatric Epidemiology, and it said that cannabis legalization is associated with fewer hospitalizations among schizophrenia patients. And this is research with the York University in Toronto that assessed, you know, emergency room related visits at a cohort of 121,061 patients with schizophrenia between 2015 and 2021. And that investigators identified decreases in cannabis-related emergency room visits in both men and women, and mental health-related visits, and cannabis and psychosis-related emergency room visits among schizophrenia patients in the years immediately following legalization. And this marked a reversal of pre-legalization trends that had shown a small month-to-month increase in cannabis-associated hospitalizations. And it said, you know, the conclusions were, despite higher baseline rates of acute care utilization among patients with schizophrenia, cannabis legalization was associated with significant reductions, particularly during phase 1. And our findings suggest that regulatory measures accompanying legalization could enhance the quality and safety of cannabis products, potentially leading to fewer adverse health outcomes in vulnerable patient populations. Furthermore, our study indicates that legalization and cannabis regulation in certain contexts may help reduce acute care utilization in vulnerable patient groups.
One thing I want to mention, and that is this has happened time and time again, where people do what is called conclusion bias, and they start with a conclusion and they work backwards. There was a study in the 50s, also in the 60s, that claimed that there was an association between psychosis and cannabis because they would find people in institutions and ask them if they've ever used cannabis or not. And if the answer was yes, they say, okay, obviously cannabis leads to psychosis. Whereas actually, these people who are actually treating themselves, self-medicating in order to get rid of their psychosis, but they made the wrong conclusion.
Well, a lot of the schizophrenia psychosis literature that I read in recent years was coming out of the United Kingdom. But ironically enough, the member of parliament that was pushing that narrative has a spouse that's associated with GW Pharmaceuticals, which is trying to corner the cannabis market in England as they move to legalize it. So, you know, you got to watch where this info comes from. And then that stuff ends up getting translated, you know, overseas. And you have these supposed experts from Harvard or University of Florida, wherever they may come out of, pushing reefer madness, you know, type of issues as well. You know, all in all, there's tons of research. You can go to normal.org. You can read the Normal News and subscribe to each and every week. You can go to publications like Marijuana Moment and check them out. There is real work that is being done when it comes to cannabis research. You can go to pubmed.gov and do your own research, ladies and gentlemen, and find that there are tens of thousands of articles in regards to cannabis and you know, medical studies that make the difference. Now, why do organizations like us exist? Well, this latest piece of tidbit of information that might have folks a little, you know, shook. Over 600 Americans each day are arrested for marijuana. Enough is enough. With half the states moved to sensible, legalized, and regulated cannabis over the past decade, you still have many jurisdictions putting marijuana consumers in handcuffs. For example, in Alabama, nearly half of all drug arrests are for marijuana. In Georgia, 40% of drug arrests and drug violations are charged with violating marijuana laws. In Texas, almost 1/3 of all drug-related arrests are from minor marijuana violations. In Pennsylvania, 1 in 5 drug arrests are for marijuana. Nationwide, police made over 220,000 marijuana-related arrests in 2023, and that's according to the FBI's new crime in the United States report. And understand that states like Florida often fail to even report their numbers. So these numbers aren't even entirely accurate. But the fact is that that's still Americans too damn many. That's over 600 a day being charged with a criminal record, being fleeced for money, our tax dollars being spent and wasted. It's just a shame. And Amendment 3, again, is that first step that addresses that. Now, I do want to talk about something that recently came out in the Wall Street Journal, and it is a major concern for all of us, but it was that legal marijuana contains dangerous mold and states are approving it anyways. And a recent study came out that showed a disproportionate share of the samples that are reported to contain mold is either just under the legal limit, and that you have lab shopping among these major medical marijuana companies trying to get the results that they want. And, for all of the concerns that folks have around Amendment 3, with the legal marijuana industry backing it, this is a major concern that we have. And I hope that our candidates that we've had on, and the folks that are listening, and the folks that win their election that we didn't endorse, should things go a certain way, address this issue of making sure that there's integrity in laboratory testing in the state of Florida and when it comes to cannabis samples. Because again, as a medical marijuana state, it is safe access for our patients that should be the biggest concern. And if there is mold, pesticides, heavy metal, and aphids and other pests and such, and parasites, that in itself is no good for medicine for sick people, for cancer patients, for Alzheimer's patients, for folks with chronic debilitating illnesses. And we should not allow medical marijuana treatment centers and vertically integrated companies, multi-state operators, to be able to doctors or laboratory shop, if you will, to get the results that they want. No different than how we see candidates will shop to show polls that they want. So this is a major concern. Carlos, you touched on this before as a business owner. When you're selling your hemp products, certificates of authenticity matter. And so, tell the folks a little bit about how when they go into your shop, what they may have a different experience around, safety and concerns for purchasing products.
I mean, I don't envy anybody that's trying to get into this business new, because the ability to provide a safe product in the hemp field requires a lot of vetting of different companies and just like understanding how these different companies operate. But I'm in a particularly good situation, because some of these companies on my shelf I've worked with for 5-6 years now. But I mean, when you're searching for a product, first off, you want to look for that certificate of authenticity. You want to make sure that they have several certificate of authenticities, and what that means is that they have proof that they're consistently testing their product. You want to make sure that COA isn't from 2 years ago, right? You want a company that tests every single month or every couple of months, right? Just something constant to make sure that they're finding a consistency in the quality of their product. Right. And then you want to look at customer reviews. I mean, one thing about this business too is if somebody gets a bunk product, they're going to complain about it, and that's going to go online. So look for a product that people stand by and people support, and they're out there, they're out there. Enjoy, Mellow Fellow, things like that. Companies that the customer seems to consistently enjoy.
Well, when we look at where we go with the future of this, right? if Amendment 3 were to pass, if the endorsed candidates that we have, win the election, folks might think, well, what happens next? Well, the very next thing that's going to happen post-election is on December 2nd, there's going to be the rescheduling hearings held by the DEA. Now, should Normal be selected, we're prepared to send our experts up there, to Virginia, in Arlington, where they're having the hearing, and testify that cannabis should not be Schedule 1. It definitely shouldn't even be Schedule 3. We don't want it on the schedule. And Schedule 3 is not appropriate because the way Schedule 3 testing works. But this is going to be an ongoing fight at every level of government until we actually get to the point where we can address these things. Now, folks have given us a lot of shit over the past couple of weeks of our endorsed candidates. And I want to be clear about one thing, is that if you're looking at the top of the ticket, this is Harris versus Trump. I want to take the time to do this compare and contrast with folks, because the Harris campaign came out just in the past week and is a pledge to legalize marijuana at the federal level. Now, Harris promises, quote, to work with Congress to ensure safe cultivation, distribution, and possession of recreational marijuana as the law of the land. Now, this pledge comes 2 weeks after an interview where she said, I think we've come to the point we have to understand we need to legalize and stop criminalizing this behavior. Now, Donald Trump has previously declared he intends to vote yes on Amendment 3, and now he's saying if elected, he'll work with Congress to enact reforms at the federal level, including the Safer Banking Act. Now, the guy had 4 years to do that, and he was the same guy who said that guys selling Nick sacks on the corner should get the death penalty.
That experiment in Colorado is not going well. That's something he said before.
Now, if you want to call it a tie, right? Because you're just one of those guys who just can't give Vice President Harris the credit that she's due. As U.S. Senator, Kamala Harris sponsored legislation to end the federal prohibition of cannabis.
But I mean, Cano, as a hemp store owner, I have to put my Republican hat on. And I have to come up with some sort of criticism here. I mean, Kamala spent all that time out in California as an attorney, and she prosecuted so many people for marijuana possession.
Over 2,000 were prosecuted. Out of those 2,000, Carlos, less than 50 saw jail time. She made sure that most folks got some type of diversion. But people like to leave that little talking point out when they want to, lambaste her as being, some super cop that was throwing people behind bars for weed, because it makes for sensational headlines. It comes up great in the debate when Tulsi Gabbard dropped the hammer on her in the primary debates in 2020.
Well, as we wrap this up today, I think we need to tell the audience two things. There's two things you got to do.
I'm going to highlight you, Gary.
The first one,
I feel like it's going to be important.
Okay, there you go. First off, vote. Vote like your life depends on it, like your country depends on it, because it does. Now, if somebody came up to us and said, all we really should be talking about is Amendment 3. No, it doesn't go that way. Yeah, that's your decision to vote on that, and you to vote as you think is right. We've given you as many educational materials as we can, and hopefully we've gotten rid of all the misinformation. Like, for instance, it does not automatically block you from being able to use cannabis in the streets. That's already in law. So don't even go with that one.
They say conflicting shit, because you're like, oh, people are going to be they're not going to be able to smoke in the streets, or you're not going to be able to smoke it anywhere, but it's going to smell like weed everywhere.
Yeah. We have clean air laws. You can't smoke in most places in Florida now.
And also, it does not block home grow. It doesn't discuss home grow. So if you want home grow, which is currently illegal, here comes number two, what we're asking you to do. We here in Suncoast Normal, Chris has been working on this. Carlos has been working with us. We've been working with other folks to create bills to fix the problems with the laws as they currently stand. And if this goes through Amendment 3, we are going to have a lot of work to do, because there's so many gaps of things that have to get done. That includes public use. That includes that if you have a kid in the house and the only thing they can find is the fact that you use cannabis, they can't take your kids away. Because right now they can, and they will. If you have a medical card right now, they can't take your kids away, even if there's no other issue. And our bill says if that's the only issue, they can't. It's like these kind of things, but we can't do it ourselves. There's only myself and Chris and the people in Suncoast Normal. We need you to just join Suncoast Normal, possibly come with us to Tallahassee, or at least help us let you know how to talk to your own representative and your own senator as to how to pass these bills as we get them filed. And in order to do that, you can be a part of the solution. And that is what Suncoast is about. That is why we put out the endorsement guide, because we need to have the right people in office who will vote for these kind of things. Because if they're just going to be a lackey for the executive branch that tells them not to do these things, things aren't going to get done. Mm-hmm. So we need to get the right people in office. We need to have the right bills, and we need to have you support them. That's your homework.
And if you don't like the way the endorsements came out, become a member. We're a membership-based organization. Help us craft. Be involved politically. Gary would love more folks to be involved in our political committee. He would love more folks to come with him to Tallahassee, talk to our senators and such. We're a diverse group. We're a diverse group politically, ethnically, religiously. You know, folks come from all different backgrounds. That's the reason we exist, is to create a safe space for responsible cannabis users to connect with each other and to address these issues. On that note, we actually have a virtual member meeting coming up this week. So if you want to know about Suncoast NORML, how you can get involved, what's coming up with upcoming elections, you can go to our website, sign up to be a part of our virtual membership committee. There's a Zoom link there that you can RSVP and such, and join us Thursday, 7 o'clock on the 24th. We're going to be on for about an hour and a half talking about these issues, talking about where we're going as an organization and how you can get more involved. Now, being a membership-based organization, our primary function is to do amazing things for our members, which is why we do an annual Halloween bash. Unfortunately, the hurricanes have kind of put a damper on the party spirit right now, but we are still going to hold Halloween 2024 on November 16th at the Dignitary Cafe right on West Shore Boulevard. Now, some of you might be wondering, well, where's Dignitary Cafe? Before you hit the bridge, going over the Gandy Bridge, 4817 Southwest Shore Boulevard is the Dignitary Cafe. So if you're going to come from across the water to St. Pete, if you're going to come from Tampa, it's an amazing spot. There's plenty of parking. Cool we're going to have one hell of a bash and party, and we're still going to have a costume contest on the 16th. So bring your best. You get a replay if your Halloween costume falls as a dud. Come on out. There's going to be live body painting there. There's a cash prize for the costume contest. And we're gonna have music, live entertainment. We're gonna have some amazing food. Yes,
it's not just a cash prize. I'm throwing in a Puffco Peak.
Puffco. Whoa! I want to compete now. I'm gonna get my costume right. Oh man, I want a Puffco.
I'm glad we have the time, because I know that this was a event that's been developing, and we decided to go with live body painting, which is great, because the cadaver painting, we thought about it first. I don't think it's legal.
Yes, it has to be a live body to body paint. Otherwise, that's just a crime scene tampering.
Yeah, because dead body painting it wasn't a popular thing.
Oh man.
I just wanted to let everybody know that I dropped the link to our virtual member meeting in the chat. Yeah. So if you want to join, you just got to click that link.
Yeah, but if you're watching this on replay on social media, it's right there in the comments. So look, this coming week, we're going to replay this episode. So if you're watching this on the replay, the next time we're going to be live is Sunday, November 3rd. We have very special guests coming up with Senator Jason Pizzo, who's actually suing the state of Florida over using your tax dollars to try and stop Amendment 3 and legalization. And I'm pretty excited headed into the election where folks are. But all in all, right now is the time to start now with the early voting. Get out and vote. If you're voting this weekend, go ahead, go to your local library. If you're in Hillsborough County, go to your supervisor of elections website for your county. Find out where the early voting sites are and what type of ID you need to bring. And then, of course, if for some reason they tell you can't vote, or if you're in the wrong spot, request a provisional ballot. And then clear up whatever your issue is with your SOE within 24 hours after that. So that's
I do want to mention, by the way, acceptable forms of identification when you go out to vote are not just your driver's license or your voter's registration in Florida, but your Florida ID, your passport, military or student ID, debit card or credit card with photo if you have one of those bizarre things. And you can even bring your, believe it or not, Florida concealed weapon or firearms license. This does not mean you should be concealed carrying in the bowls, just so you know. But that you can bring your license, and that will help you vote. So there's ultimate ways you can go ahead and get there and vote legally. Do it.
Basically, like every document that an illegal immigrant can't get is what you need to vote. So We'll see you.
All right, guys.
Catch y'all in the rotation.